What's going on, guys? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Niners News here on 49ers Hive. My name is Zach Hernandez, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Matt Llewellyn. And today we are going to be looking back on the first half of the 49ers 2020 season. Matt, it's been pretty depressing to say the least. What are your thoughts on the first half, I guess?
Just, like the T-shirt that you wore last week says it all. Rehab tour. Everybody's injured. I don't think a team can reasonably be expected to, overcome that many injuries. But at the same time, even with the injuries that we know are kind of out of the control of the team, you can't help but sit here disappointed halfway through the season. The talk before the preseason was everybody's back with a vengeance. Everybody's hungry. Everybody's there to get down to business, revenge tour. We heard all this stuff, and, you start with such high hopes, and then you look back at the season halfway through, and you're like, okay, well, not only are there injuries, but now it's like, I think pretty much everybody's out on Jimmy Garoppolo as the starting quarterback. Quan Alexander is gone. We don't know what we have as far as the offensive line goes, especially with Mike McGlinchey, what's going on with him. And so, this team is turmoil. We're looking forward to free agency and how many people are going to be free agents this year. We're still up against the cap. There's so many unknowns, and it makes for, kind of a stressful situation where it's not just like, okay, if we're going to replace Jimmy, do we want to have a bad record for the rest of the way so that we get a good quarterback, or do we want to maybe limp into the playoffs and just, hope that the team gets better and kind of gels? We're kind of stuck in no man's land. We're not as bad as teams like the Jets or the Jaguars who are, racing for the bottom, and, they're tanking for Trevor and doing all that stuff, and they're going to get their guy of the future. But then we're not locked for the playoffs either. We're stuck in that between 6-10 and 7-9, like no man's land, where you don't want to be, where you're not going to get one of those top flight impact players in the draft. And then you have questions all over the roster. And that's not a good spot for the 49ers. I think that they can compete if they make the right moves, but it's going to be hard to get there. So looking back on the first half, I can't say that it's anything less than a disappointment so far.
Yeah, and some things you touched on there that I think are the biggest disappointments for me are the fact that going into this year, myself included, we all said this team is, a lot of the same players are returning. That's really rare when you got a Super Bowl team that is able to bring back a lot of the same guys, minus a couple of key players. Obviously, Emmanuel Sanders and DeForest Buckner were the main two people kept talking about. That's not what's happened so far. Very quickly after week 2, we saw major player after major player go down with injury, ACLs, high ankle sprains. And this team is completely different. I mean, we saw it Thursday night against the Packers. Even Aaron Rodgers himself, he was like, this is not the team that beat us in January in the playoffs. This is a completely different team. So, it's unfortunate because that was a huge plus going into this year. Yeah. And for me, I think the biggest disappointment for me looking back, now that we're in November, is this might have been the 49ers window, and we might be seeing it actively shut right in front of our eyes, because it really depends on what happens after this year. How many, like you said, how many of these free agents are coming back? What do they do under center? If they're not able to answer these questions with good answers and answers that are able to be sustainable, it could be time for a rebuild. I mean, who knows? I might be getting ahead of myself, but I think for me, that's kind of the biggest disappointment is looking back and thinking, did the 49ers miss their chance? Was that their chance last season? And then this year, injuries kind of just completely sped up the decline. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think that the disappointment this year actually makes those, 7 minutes away from a Super Bowl championship even worse, because the opportunities are few and far between. And like you said, is the window shut? I don't necessarily think it's shut, but I think it is definitely close to being closed. And it's one of those things where even if they make all the right moves, they're probably a playoff team next year, but then you're looking at like probably 2022 before they're really ready to compete again. They have a good base, but, a lot of their contracts are stacking up on them. And, we're going through this period where so many people need to be re-signed or replaced. And there's, the cap's going to take a hit because of COVID, and, there's uncertainty at every single position. And it's one of those things where, people are still defending Jimmy. And my thing is like, sure, you can defend Jimmy, but when you look at the cap situation, it's kind of hard to eat that 27 million when you can get out of it for a little over two. And then that's 25 million that you can spread to other players that, and maybe draft a guy, or, take a guy on the cheap, like a Sam Darnold or something like that. It's just, there's too many unknowns about this team. And that's never a good feeling to have as a fan. And I'm sure it's not. I mean, I'm sure Kyle and John aren't too happy about it either, having this much unknown going on. But it's pretty clear that things are going to be a lot different. This roster is going to look way different next year, and it is disappointing. We haven't even touched on, again, you touched on a little bit DeForest Buckner leaving, but we haven't touched on the people that have stayed and aren't producing. Ahkello Witherspoon disappeared. Like, he can't get on the field to save his life. I mean, he's in a similar situation to the now departed Dante Pettis, where it seems like the coaches have just straight up given up on him. You look at a guy like Eric Armstead, who has a prohibitive cap number, so he's going to be back, but he's essentially stealing money right now based on his production. He's been one of the biggest disappointments of the year for me. Not that I didn't see it coming, because I kind of called this last year. I always knew that Buckner was the better player and that Armstead was riding others' coattails to production. But, it's one of those things where, windows aren't open for a long time, and we're not a franchise. And it's weird to say because we were in the 80s and in the 90s, but for the 2000s onward, this franchise hasn't been a perennial playoff contender year in, year out. We go through a lot of dry spells, and that's because I don't think that we've gotten the quarterback right. So it went from like, can Jimmy get it done, but we still need to address the interior O-line, and we were talking like, we got corners coming up at the end of the season. So now it's like, man, do we take a quarterback round one and then kind of like build around him for the next 2 years and hopefully get there? It's so amazing how quickly things can change. And, it's kind of like a worn out phrase at this point, but man, 2020 has been a rough year.
A couple of weeks ago, I kind of said to myself, leave it to 2020 to ruin the 49ers. They were so good last year, and just injuries, coaching mistakes, player mistakes, whatever the case may be, they got ruined. It's just completely not the same team. And I was looking over the unrestricted free agents schedule for next year. Obviously, the biggest one's likely Trent Williams. When they traded for him, they knew they only had him for a 1-year contract. Richard Sherman, Solomon Thomas, Tart, Juszczyk, Coleman, K1, Kendrick Bourne. There's a lot of big names here that the 49ers, Jason Verrett, Jordan Reed, even Ahkello Witherspoon, who they definitely won't bring back. So it's going to be tough. How do they allocate their funds and disperse them accordingly and as smart as they can? Because it's going to be tough. There's a lot of guys that they're just simply going to have to make a business decision and say, sorry, we can't afford to have you back. And the 49ers, hopefully they have a lot of draft picks in this upcoming draft. They need to hit on like 60% of those picks.
Yeah.
Not just starters, but, like key contributors moving forward. But I think there's reason to be optimistic because, and I've said this on Twitter a few times, Matt, this reminds me of maybe not to the same extent when Jimmy Garoppolo tore his ACL, and us 49ers fans, we knew this is going to be a sacrificed year, but we're netting the second overall pick, what ended up being second overall pick, and a really good player. And look, they were able to get Nick Bosa out of that. So if you're able to get if we go into the same situation, we sacrifice this 2020 year and we net arguably a better player, because if you weigh the positions, the quarterback, I would argue, is a more important position. They might even come out better. I mean, they have a lot of key players. They have a nice young core on the offense that's young, that's going to be together for a few more years at the very least. They have some bright pieces on defense that they can build around, specifically Fred Warner. I think it all comes down to, who do they have under center next year? Do they keep Jimmy Garoppolo, Are they able to move off of him and use that money to keep other pieces? Excuse me. That's huge. And I think that's what's key moving forward to how the first half of next season will be.
Yeah, and it's going to be key, like you said, that they hit on these draft picks and hit on the limited free agents that they're going to be able to get, and to re-sign a guy like Trent Williams, and they're going to have to do something with D Ford. He's got to go. They're probably going to have to sacrifice, bringing back Richard Sherman and Jaquaski Tart. Like, those guys are going to be gone. Maybe you restructure Jimmy Ward and kick the can on his cap hit down the road or something like that. But there's a lot of moves that need to be made. Fred Warner's going to need to get paid, and he deserves it, and they better pay him. It's like a Kittle situation where he's so valuable to the team that, like, you just can't afford to not have him, Yeah, it's crazy. It's been a crazy year. And again, it's not just the disappointment as far as like play or whatever, the injuries too. I mean, we've had like what seems like 200 high ankle sprains, it's just like, and it comes in waves too. As soon as we get somebody back, we lose somebody else. It was like Raheem Mostert's back for a game. Oh no, never mind, he's gone again. Tevin Coleman comes back. He gets 2 carries. Nope, he's gone again. George Kittle comes back for 3 games. Oh nope, he's gone again. It's never ending. It's carousel, and it's hard to say. Don't look at the strength and conditioning staff and the medical staff, but this is a lot. I don't know what's going on. It seems like there's something cursed in Santa Clara waters. I think this is the candlestick curse. They never should have left San Francisco, and they moved south a little bit to get their fancy stadium that nobody likes because it wasn't built for Santa Clara, and it's kind of been a cursed situation. We went from the Harbaugh years where we're going to NFC championships and a Super Bowl to they open that stadium and all of a sudden Harbaugh's gone, and we make it to another Super Bowl, but then we lose, and it's been like feast or famine since then. So I don't know what's going on, but it needs to be addressed. But there is some hope for the future. They got a lot of young guys. The regime really does seem to draft well, particularly in the mid rounds. So hopefully and it seems to have gotten better as they've gone along too. So hopefully they can make something out of it. But I mean, there's a lot of things that need to get done before we can say that the 49ers are back in contention. So overall, my grade, if I had to grade the first half, I mean, you have to go like a D minus. This is not anywhere where you would expect them to be. So if they were a student, they'd be getting remedial education right now. D minus is my grade for the first half.
Yeah, easily D the highest. This has been a sucky year. And I saw, I forget who tweeted out the standings a couple days ago, and it's like it's crazy. They're within a couple of games of first place still. They feel like they're 10 games back, even with 8 or 9 games played. It's unfortunate, but it really does feel like the gap is that wide, especially with the injuries and even when Jimmy was in, how badly he was playing. So I guess we'll see how things shape up for the second half of the season. There's reason to be optimistic, like I said, moving forward. I guess just 49ers fans, the only thing I can say is we've been here before. We know what it's like to be crappy, and just buckle in because we're all in it for the long haul. And in the end, I think this year will be something that we don't even care about looking forward. So as long as they play their cards right. But I think that's going to do it for us today, guys. I want to thank you all for tuning in to another episode of Niners News here on 49ers Hive. If you like what you see, hit that subscribe button below, support the channel, hit that like button as well, and drop a comment below. What do you think of the 49ers first half of the season so far, and what grade would you give them?
Go ahead and click the bell, turn your notifications on so you never miss a video. Until next time, go Niners.